This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Muteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Chinese President Xi Jinping begins a week-long South America tour, opening a China-funded mega port in Peru. Also on the sidelines of APEC, a high-stakes meeting with Japan's Prime Minister. The Taiwan President William Lai announces a sensitive trip to visit allies in the Pacific, which could also take him to Hawaii and the U.S. territory of Guam. The South Korean opposition leader Lee Jae-myung vows to appeal a court decision after he was convicted of violating election law, which comes with a suspended one-year prison sentence. And China's economic data hints at the uneven impact of Beijing's stimulus measures as retail sales pick up pace, but factory output slows. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, what's China's so-called new quality productive forces? The latest buzzword in its search for more economic and social development. What does this new concept entail? And what will it mean for the US-China rivalry? Chinese President Xi Jinping has kick-started his week-long diplomatic blitz of South America as he opens a $1.3 billion mega port on the sidelines of the APEC summit happening in Peru. From Lima, President Xi and Peru leader Dina Boluarte opened the Chanque port by video link. The deep-water port in Peru is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative and its latest push into South America. Mr. Xi said that the port, when completed, will cut transit time between Peru and China by more than 10 days. And it will also serve Brazil, Chile, and other South American countries, allowing them to bypass ports in Mexico and the U.S. China is expected to spend billions more to make the port a major shipping hub between Asia and South America. Now, a number of key meetings are also taking place later on the second day of the APEC forum. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is due to meet with President Xi and also with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Well, Kate Fisher in Peru with more on day one of the summit, including the upcoming meeting between Presidents Biden and President Xi.
The leaders of the world's two largest economies are in the same place for the first time in a year. President Xi and President Biden both arrived in Lima on Thursday. However, the specter of America's next president, Donald Trump, will likely hang over that meeting and others as world leaders weigh what to expect from his incoming administration. The former US president has already vowed to intensify the trade war that he began in his previous term by imposing tariffs of 60% on Chinese imports. A strategy the Vietnamese president warned against in his keynote speech.
Isolations, protectionism, and trade wars lead only to recession, conflict, and poverty. Now more than ever, it's critical to transcend the zero-sum game mindset and guard against nationalism skewing policy decisions.
He was speaking at the start of APEC's CEO summit, where discussions are centered on trade, energy transition, the future of work, critical minerals, and sustainability. The aim to find innovative solutions for the most critical challenges facing the region. And Indonesia's new president brought the day to a close with his keynote speech, continuing a week of jet-setting diplomacy. He was in Beijing with Xi Jinping on Saturday, and then he was in Washington with Joe Biden on Tuesday. On Friday, delegates will hear a message from Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered by a special representative. He will also have his first meeting with the new Japanese Prime Minister. We'll hear from the leaders of Thailand and New Zealand, as well as the CEO of TikTok and the IMF's managing director. Kate Fisher, CNA, Lima, Peru.
That's right, as what Kate mentioned, all eyes are also going to be on Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, which is scheduled to meet on the sidelines of the APEC summit today. And for more insights, Naoko Eto, she joins us now. She's a professor at the Department of Political Science at Gakushuin University. And also joining us this evening is CNA Shenzhen correspondent Deborah Wong. First to you, Deborah. Well, we know that, Japan and China's leaders, they are preparing to meet amid heightened tensions. So what do you think are some of the most pressing issues that will likely dominate their agenda?
So I'll tell you, like you mentioned, they are meeting at a period of heightened tensions. Geopolitically, there's a lack of political trust. There's also suspicions over security. Take Japan's involvement in Quad, for instance. It makes China uneasy. Now, Quad countries have pledged to launch joint patrols in the Indo-Pacific. And Japan and China are also embroiled in a long-standing territorial dispute in the East China Sea. And then we look at the matter of the Fukushima discharge. So when that was announced, China launched a blanket ban on all aquatic products coming from Japan. And although a consensus has been reached in August for Japan to establish some sort of long-standing monitoring system, Chinese imports of Japanese aquatic products have not resumed. And so these issues are something that, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, as well as Japan's National Security Advisor Takeo Akiba, had discussed when they met earlier this month. And, I think we can also expect the leaders to follow up on these issues as well as reaffirm bilateral ties. In fact, when Ishiba was elected as prime minister, when he came into power, both Beijing and Tokyo, in fact, have increased the number of high-level exchanges. And it does send a signal that the new administration is willing to forge better relations with China.
All right. On the other hand, let's bring you in now, Professor Eto. Well, the Prime Minister Ishiba, he has previously proposed an Asian NATO, right? And I'm wondering, how do you think, what is that impact going to be in terms of China's perception of what Japan's intentions are? And do you think this could complicate efforts to improve relations on both sides?
Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. I agree with Deborah's point of view that what we need to do for this time is demonstrate the good atmosphere between Japan and China to show both sides have an intention to rebuild the relationship, which was delayed in terms of the relationship compared to the other countries after the pandemic. So, but at the same time, we are wondering how Ishiba can deal with the relationship with China. And as you pointed, Asian NATO could be the key issue from the outsiders, for the outsiders' perspective, to considering about the Japan-China relations. But from Japanese perspective, it is not that serious, because I don't think it will have much impact of not only the relationship with China, but also the Japanese diplomacy itself. I think in his policy research in early October, Prime Minister Ishiba already did not mention this Asian NATO and expressed his view that it would take more time to realize this concept, which means he already agreed that he will not pursue his own political view. So there has been a lot of discussion in Japan about the fact that this is not the official Japanese foreign policy, and Japan should explain this to the neighbor countries so that they do not become suspicious. So I think the Chinese side also understands this Japanese perception, and they probably think that the idea is not very feasible to begin with. Also, as Chinese economic recovery has been slow, there's a very strong desire on the part of the Chinese government to continue to attract investment from Japan. So I think for this time, Asian NATO will not be the key issue for this meeting.
All right, we hear you loud and clear. That's not going to have much impact with Asian NATO not being so feasible. But Deborah, what about historical grievances, though? And all these unresolved disputes continue to play in terms of shaping China-Japan relations. How do you think these lingering tensions will be addressed?
Well, for starters, the Chinese are unhappy that Japan hasn't fully acknowledged its wartime crimes, like the Nanjing massacre, and it also adds to the negative perception on both sides. Now, former Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, he commemorated wartime leaders, and a couple of them include war criminals, most recently on the anniversary of Japan's World War II surrender, and that event actually angered Beijing. So these issues have so far fanned the flames of nationalism on both sides. Most recently here in Shenzhen, there was quite an unfortunate incident that took place. A Japanese schoolboy, he was stabbed here in Shenzhen, and the killing happened on 18 September. It's a politically sensitive date because it also marked the start of Japan's invasion in Manchuria. And the Chinese side called it an isolated incident. Reports and videos of that were heavily censored, videos removed as well, and the Japanese officials are demanding answers to that. So I think if anything, it's important if both sides were to move forward, from all these historical grievances, it's important to identify areas of cooperation. And Professor, I want to get your take on this. What do you think areas of common interest or cooperation could be?
I think it must be, of course, economic cooperation. And in fact, cooperation at the corporate level is progressing in various aspects. For example, Toyota, a leading Japanese automaker, is working with Tencent to develop EVs, which I think is symbolic of new initiatives amongst corporates. In addition, there are a wide range of industries in which Japanese companies are involved in Chinese market. Also, there are some opportunities for Japanese companies to deal because they know how to deal with the aspect of deflation of economy. However, various forms of economic cooperation will be limited, could be limited to areas that do not involve economic security. So it will be, the limited industry could be appeared more and more clearly under the competition of U.S.-China relations and the issue of how to deal with the dual-use technologies or how to protect our safety of supply chain will be the key issue when we consider about the cooperation with China.
And Professor, to add to that, I have to talk about, Trump. And how do you think Prime Minister Ishiba is going to be balancing his relationships with President Xi and Donald Trump, given their complexities of their respective interests as well as priorities?
It is very difficult to expect how the Trump administration will deal with the Xi Jinping administration because we see there kind of chemistry between the Xi himself and President Trump. We already witnessed that they had a close relationship when, for example, when President Trump visited to the Beijing during his first term. But at the same time, what we need to see here is how the team of Trump will react to the Chinese pressure, especially on the competition on the military and economy. So we already realized that some appointment has been done, like U.S. Mr. Lighthizer is expected to return as the USTR representative. So the conflict between the U.S. and China will almost certainly become more pronounced, I think. So although Japanese diplomacy is based on the Japan-U.S. alliance, many people in Japan are well aware of that fact that Japan has very deep relations with China. So we are in a very complex situation now, and considering how to deal with. The key part here is that we are not the only country who is at the loss, who will be at the loss between competition in the competition between China and United States. So this is probably the same situation for all of us, and the next 4 years will be the period of survival of a certain kind, I think. And it will be a chance at the same time to show off our diplomatic skills and see how well we can turn a crisis into an opportunity.
Right, very well said. Thank you so very much for your time and thoughts, Professor Naoko Eto from Gakushun University, and as always, CNA's Deborah Wong. Now, Taiwan President William Lai is planning stopovers in Hawaii and the U.S. territory of Guam during an upcoming trip to visit diplomatic allies in the Pacific. Well, that's according to a Reuters report, citing sources briefed on the visit. Now, Mr. Lai's presence in the U.S. could prompt further anger from China as it views Taiwan as its own territory. Well, Washington and Taipei have not acknowledged the plans. Beijing has sounded its objection on any interaction between the Taiwan government and foreign officials.
关于台湾地区领导人在美国所谓的过境问题，我们一贯坚决反对美方安排这种过境。我们敦促美方恪守一个中国原则和中美3个联合公报规定，不允许赖清德过境，不向台独势力发出任何错误信号，以实际行动维护中美关系和台海和平稳定。
Both Hawaii and Guam are home to major U.S. military bases. Well, this reported trip comes shortly after the U.S. election. Results saw President-elect Donald Trump, whose first administration strongly backed Taiwan, return to the White House. He has since nominated Taiwan-friendly Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. Mr. Rubio has been a vocal supporter of Taiwan, issuing statements backing the island's democracy and introducing legislation strengthening ties. Coming up on East Asia tonight, economic data out of China shows strength returning to consumption, but weakness in manufacturing. Plus, Japan's economy grows at a slower pace in the third quarter, helping to justify Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's case for a stimulus plan. Hello again. You're watching East Asia Tonight right here on CNA, and it is time now for your business news with Roland Lim. And there's a slew of economic data coming out of China. How did it go?
Well, China's economy has showed some signs of stabilization, hinting that Beijing's stimulus measures may be bearing fruit, although some weakness still persists in key industries. Retail sales in October marked their fastest growth since February. The figure grew by 4.8% on year, beating market expectations. The growth was largely boosted by a week-long national holiday and Singles' Day shopping, which started mid-October. That's about 10 days earlier than usual. But on the flip side, industrial output grew at a slower pace of 5.3% on year and missed market forecast. Now, the mixed data picture suggesting that uneven impact of Beijing's stimulus measures. Fixed asset investment for the year to October, well, that saw growth of 3.4% from the same period last year. It's about the same pace as in the January to September period. Property investments declined 10.3%, worsening from a slump in the first 9 months. And for more insights, we are now speaking with Hao Zhou. He is Chief Economist at Guotai Jian'an International. Hao Zhou, good to join us here from Hong Kong. I guess, first off, does the latest data suggest that China is on target to meet the official forecast of about 5% growth this year?
Well, thank you for having me here. I think it's very clear that today's number at least shows that the economy has been at least shows some signs of stabilization for now. I think the retail sales numbers are very encouraging for me because really speaking, if you go to many cities in China, we do see that the restaurants get more and more crowded compared to a few quarters back. So basically, I think we can see that probably China will achieve kind of 5% target. I think a lot of investment banks they're raising China GDP forecast after today's releases. But of course, things might be again difficult next year because Trump is on the way. A lot of tariffs will be raised. U.S.-China relations will be relatively ugly in the future. But for now, I think the stimulus package is working. I think the 5% target or 5% growth will be on the target for now.
Okay, if that's the case, then government should be more focused on implementation of policy rather than rolling out more supportive measures the remaining 2 months of this year.
I think it's hard to say, what is rolling out and what is implementation. To be honest, I think basically you have to give the market expectation that if things can be or could go the other side, the government can do more. I think that's the most important kind of policy implication or policy kind of direction the government should give to the market. For now, I think at least we see some kind of encouraging signs here. One is that retail consumption, which accounts for 6% of China's GDP, is picking up, and also the other side, which is important, is that the property market looks okay for now. At least there is some improvement in the first tier cities. So I think in general, I think the policy is working, and in the meantime, the expectations could be that there might be more. I think government or the authorities should give the market or investors or the authority or the households this kind of impression that as long as the economy needs, the policy will be there.
Well, there seems to be pockets of strength in consumption, as you mentioned, and that's thanks to accelerated fiscal spending. But is it a one-off? I mean, the figures could have been skewed by the long Golden Week holiday and subsidies to trade in old appliances for new ones.
Of course, I think this is a very important and a good question. Basically, people always ask, whether China's kind of consumption strength is sustainable. I think the one thing we have to acknowledge here is that the retail sales number today is better than expected. After so many disappointments, this is important to see first sign or a few signs of improvement here. And the second thing is that whether the income growth, which is critical for the consumption going forward, or the income will be there, and this is also related to employment and job market. So I think for me, I think for now the thing is that looks like there's kind of some kind of synergy from the policy side. But going forward, there definitely some more, or the government need to do more to make sure that, or to ensure that things can be, or the consumption improvement can be sustainable towards next year. At least after if Trump goes out with a lot of kind of tough measures on China, the consumption will be there to support or to be the cornerstone for the economy.
I'd like to talk about the Trump effect. I mean, exports has been one of the bright spots. I mean, it leapt the most in 2 years last month. But is that momentum likely to be derailed by a second Trump presidency?
Well, I think, to be honest, nobody can predict Trump. I think, that might be the good thing, because, if you can't predict, Trump, what you can do is to do yourself, So basically, from this kind of perspective, what we can expect is that China will focus more on domestic demand, and in the meantime, try to counter the Trump effect in the future. Basically, we can see that China probably will kind of provide some kind of tax rebate to exporters in the future if Trump's impose more tariffs in the future. But given that the domestic consumption accounts for, as I mentioned earlier, 6% of the economy, I think this is still the most important thing. And also, if you can't export those goods to the U.S., maybe you can export goods to ASEAN, including Singapore in the future. So I think the dynamics will be very, very interesting, and things will be very, very diverse in the future as well.
Okay, we shall see what he does next. Thank you for that analysis, Hao Zhou, Chief Economist from Guotai Jian'an International. Now, turning to Japan, where its economy sharply cooled in the third quarter, strengthening the case for a stimulus plan from the government. Annualized GDP expanded 0.9%, beating analysts' estimates, but significantly slower than the 2.2% logged in the second quarter. Private consumption grew at a faster pace, despite a major typhoon and cost pressures. The weaker growth will help Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba justify a stimulus plan said to be unveiled later this month. He's under pressure to drum up support, and that's after voter discontent over the economy played a part in his party's loss of its parliament majority. The rise in private consumption could also help strengthen the case for a rate hike by the Bank of Japan after it held rates at ultra-low levels last month. Now, they said the risks around the U.S. economy are somewhat subsiding, indicating that a rate hike could be on the cards. And that is the latest in business. Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un calls for the immediate mass production of attack drones designed to hit targets on land and out at sea. Environmental activists denounce the presence of oil executives at the UN Climate Summit in Azerbaijan. CNA's Jack Board joins us live after the break. Chinese President Xi Jinping begins a week-long South American tour, opening a China-funded mega port in Peru. Also on the sidelines of APEC, a high-stakes meeting with Japan's Prime Minister. Taiwan President William Lai, according to a report, is planning a sensitive trip to visit allies in the Pacific, which could also take him to Hawaii and the U.S. territory of Guam. And South Korean opposition leader Lee Jae-myung vows to appeal a court decision after he was convicted of violating election law. The court handed Lee a suspended one-year prison term after it ruled that he had made false statements while denying corruption allegations during the presidential campaign 2 years ago. Then he narrowly lost to Yoon Sung-yeol. The 60-year-old told media he plans to appeal the verdict. If the ruling is upheld, Lee will lose his parliamentary seat and not be allowed to run for office for the next 5 years. Lee is also facing 3 other trials over corruption and other criminal charges. It's not clear if the Supreme Court will decide on any of the cases before the next presidential vote in 2027.
오늘의 이 장면도 대한민국 현대사의 한 장면이 될 것입니다. 현실의 법정은 아직 2번 더 남아 있고, 그리고 민심과 역사의 법정은 영원합니다. 항소하게 될 것입니다. 기본적인 사실 인정부터 도저히 수긍하기 어려운 그런 결론입니다. 우리 국민 여러분께서도 상식과 정의에 입각해서 판단해 보시면 충분히 결론에 이르실 수 있을 것입니다.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has called for the immediate mass production of suicide attack drones. He witnessed a test of the weapons system, which is designed to hit both land and sea targets. Questions have been raised as to whether Pyongyang received technical help from Moscow to develop them. The drones were produced by North Korea's unmanned aerial technology complex and were first unveiled as part of the country's arsenal back in August. Experts say that based on images released by state media, the drones looked similar to the Russian-made Lancet 3, the Israeli Harop and Hero 30, and it's believed the North may have acquired the technology for these weapons from Russia. North Korean state media say weapons tests yesterday saw the drones precisely hit targets after flying along predetermined paths. According to KCNA, Mr. Kim said that the competition for using military drones is accelerating around the world and called for their integration into his country's military strategy. North Korea and Russia recently ratified a mutual defense pact. As part of that deal, it's believed Pyongyang has been receiving new military technology from Moscow in exchange for soldiers. And there are also reports about North Korea deploying its troops to help Russia with its war in Ukraine, with U.S. and South Korean officials saying these forces have engaged in combat on the battlefield. China's environment minister has called for cooperation among global South countries to tackle the climate crisis. Speaking on the sidelines of the ongoing UN climate talks, COP29, he hit out at trade barriers for raising the cost of addressing the crisis.
一些单边措施、绿色壁垒等逆全球化的举措，极大地增加了全球气候行动的成本。广大发展中国家也面临绿色低碳转型过程中资金、技术、能力等方面的巨大挑战。在这个关键的时刻，加强南南合作是应对气候危机、推动气候治理多边进程和国际合作的重要举措。
The Chinese government has been criticizing carbon border taxes and other restrictive trade measures raised by the EU, saying that they hurt emerging markets and disrupt climate talks. China also says it's on track to achieve carbon peaking in 2030 and carbon neutrality in 2050. The UN's climate chief commended Beijing's role in promoting South-South cooperation. And for more, we are joined now by CNA's climate change correspondent Jack Board live in Baku. Jack, we all know that U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, he's going to be entering the White House officially in January. Considering his dismissal of the climate emergency, do you think we could see another country possibly stepping up to lead the fight against climate change?
Of course, you're talking about China, and that is still a big watch. Certainly, developed nations are pushing pretty hard to have China become part of a broader base of donor countries for this kind of larger climate financing pot. They also want to include the likes of Russia and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. China has been reluctant to do this in the past, and most of its climate financing lies outside of this UN system through various bilateral arrangements and other regional initiatives. And what we've heard this week from Beijing is that they firmly reject the notion of becoming a major donor. But here at COP, China's top planner has said that the country is willing to play a more active role in global climate governance. Interesting to note as well that the group of African nations here, that's the G77, which China also belongs to, appears reluctant to really push China on this funding question out of fear of alienating the world's second biggest economy. Something to watch. And if we look at Southeast Asia, I've spoken to experts who say, that this part of the world is really poised to take advantage of China's leadership if it can work out some of the obstacles that have existed over the past few years. So take a listen to Jerry Arances from the organization SEED.
We hope that China will actually use its renewable energy advantage as well as its, its financial resources. We all know that it has a lot of facilities, especially its South-South cooperation with Southeast Asian governments and sub-governments. I think, now that you have the climate denier again in the White House, China should be bold enough to actually occupy that space for the region.
Well, Jack, we know that there are many executives of these oil companies. They're present at the summit, being an Energy Day at COP29. But at the same time, these environmental groups, they've denounced the presence of the fossil fuel industry. Do you think that the two groups could possibly come together and with some form of consensus?
Look, I don't think so. The divide is pretty wide between these two types of groups, and that the divisions certainly haven't been eased at all here in Baku. What we do need, though, is that the parties themselves need to come together and find consensus. And on that point, too, those divisions still seem to remain in place nearly 1 week into COP29. And in the middle of this, there are increasing calls from prominent climate leaders from around the world for a complete overhaul of COP, of this UN process, saying that this is simply not fit for purpose anymore. So we've had the likes of the former UN chief Ban Ki-moon, the former president of Ireland, coming out in a pretty bold letter directly to the UN, saying that the COP process needs to be re-looked at, overhauled. Something has to change because this process simply isn't working. We've had others using even more visceral language here, saying that having the petro-states like Azerbaijan, like Egypt, like UAE, the past three hosts of these summits in charge is like having a drug dealer at a rehab clinic. So I don't think that language is particularly helpful At the same time, you have Azerbaijan keenly still promoting its oil and gas sector. Its economy is reliant on fossil fuels. You've had the president of Azerbaijan saying, even at this very summit, that fossil fuels are a gift from God. So these divisions are rife. At the same time, we've also had data today showing that there are more than 1,700 oil and gas lobbyists attending the COP talks. So you put all of these people in one room and trying to find agreement and consensus is increasingly difficult. Otelli?
Right, so no consensus anytime soon. Well, I'm going to leave you to chase down more stories, Jack, but thanks so very much for spending your Friday evening with us. CNA's climate change correspondent Jack Board, live from Baku in Azerbaijan. Storm Usagi is headed towards southern Taiwan after it wreaked havoc in the Philippines. It has weakened to a severe tropical storm from super typhoon strength. About a day after it made landfall and lashed northern Luzon with intense rain and winds, Taiwan's Met Agency says Usagi is expected to make landfall early tomorrow. It has issued land warnings for the island's southern regions. The Philippines, meantime, is bracing for its sixth storm in 3 weeks. Typhoon Mani is barreling towards the country meantime and will further strengthen before striking central Philippines this weekend. It is projected to make landfall near the heavily populated capital of Manila before blowing into the South China Sea next week. Mani is expected to pile more misery on regions already pounded by Usagi. Rescue teams are still working to reach affected residents in northern Luzon, and officials are probing the extent of the damage. No casualties have been reported so far. Africa is touted as a new frontier for renewable energy, but the continent has struggled to harness the vast potential of its clean power sources due to a lack of access to finances, poor infrastructure, and political instability. But new financing from the UN's COP29 climate summit might help. Well, Chris Okramringa reports from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Africa is a vast landscape long poised for an energy revolution, thanks to what the sun and wind can provide. But that transformation hasn't quite taken shape. Some 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa remain without access to electricity, according to the International Energy Agency.
Nous fûmes d'abord au village, il avait dit que nous étions au village. Vite aux aïko mené, vraiment ya bana mboka. Parce que awa courant ba côté la kabiso na bandako ba criminels ils viennent ici en cascade et la partie restante là-bas ce n'est que hier qu'on a tabassé un papa qui fut pensionné de l'ONATRA.
It's one consequence of energy poverty in what is already one of the poorest countries in the world. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is banking on water to help overcome this. It has plans to build a third hydropower plant at the existing Grand Inga Dam project. This could generate 4,800 megawatts of electricity, enough to power nearly 5 million more homes and 3 times what the entire dam now generates. But the plans have been in the works for decades.
Le défi principal est financier. Il y a 2 volets à regarder sur ce plan-là. Il y a le volet national. L'État congolais devrait, en tout cas, mettre sur la table un certain niveau de financement. C'est vrai qu'avec beaucoup de problèmes que nous avons sur le plan socio-économique, l'État congolais fait un effort, c'est-à-dire il disponibilise un certain niveau de moyens financiers, mais il faut dire que ce n'est pas suffisant. C'est ça qui fait que nous participons beaucoup dans les forums internationaux pour mobiliser des investissements étrangers.
There was hope that the project would one day also provide hydroelectricity to Namibia, Angola, Botswana, and South Africa. But the project would cost $80 billion, a figure that has been beset by funding challenges, including a pullout by the World Bank. So, in the meantime, Congolese business people have taken matters into their own hands, as others are doing in Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya, to provide affordable solar power to local communities.
Déjà, nous luttons contre le réchauffement climatique. Pourquoi? Parce que notre produit-service ne contribue pas à l'émission de gaz à effet de serre. Plutôt, il lutte contre ça. Et aussi, nous luttons contre la précarité énergétique. Donc actuellement, notre pays connaît beaucoup de coupures.
One upside to solar power is that it doesn't need a grid. Some families in African countries like the DRC are now turning to solar energy because of the unreliable power supply from the national electricity grid. These solar panels installed on rooftops are able to operate without serious interruptions and provide clean energy, which is critical to reducing air pollution and climate change. Wind power is another answer, but it hasn't been easy either. It's taken flight in a few African countries, but the Global Wind Energy Council says Africa is using less than 1% of its wind power potential. Poverty levels and the high cost to install and maintain renewable energy projects are the main issues. For Africa, including the DRC, some help might come from the COP29 climate summit in Azerbaijan, where climate financing and carbon credits are on the agenda.
L'invitation, c'est aussi sur cette question de crédit carbone. Puisque nous avons une forêt qui contribue à réguler le climat mondial, nous contribuons énormément. Il faut impérativement que les techniciens et les leaders du monde puissent se concentrer sur la question de savoir, mais puisque nous le faisons, nous contribuons naturellement, comment est-ce qu'on peut avoir une compensation en fait financière qui peut permettre alors que nous puissions investir dans des projets d'électrification.
Nations agreed at last year's COP summit to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. But for fossil fuel-dependent Africa, where renewable energy reportedly accounts for just 1/5 of its electricity output, that target remains out of reach. Chris Ochamringa, CNA, Kinshasa.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, China rolls out a revamped strategy as it seeks a way out of its economic woes. We'll look at the impact it could have on geopolitics. As China searches for a way out of its economic downturn, its leaders are focusing on what they call new quality productive forces. It's an industrial plan larger in scale and scope than the Made in China policy implemented almost 10 years ago. Well, CNA's documentary series, When Titans Clash, examines the move and how they will impact geopolitics.
The robots are coming, and there's a high likelihood that they are going to be made in China. According to Chinese government data, as of July 2024, China holds over 190,000 valid patents related to robotics, accounting for about 2/3 of the global total.
中国每年的机器人产业的市场份额的增长量上，都已经连续10年出现了2位数的增长啊，每年都是10%、15%、20%、30%的增长，所以这就是使得机器人行业在中国呀，每3年左右就会翻一番。
China is already the largest industrial robot market in the world. In 2022, China accounted for 52% of all new industrial robots installed worldwide, up from 14% a decade earlier. But China is still not the largest robot manufacturer. According to the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, Japan, Germany, and Switzerland are the leading robot makers. That is fast changing.
China has many competitive leading robotics companies, some of which they acquired, like KUKA in Germany several years ago, but also Xiasun, which is a Chinese robotics company. And if you go inside a battery EV or advanced manufacturing plant in China, you're just going to see a lot of automation, a lot of industrial robotics. Obviously, China didn't lead in those technologies. Those were first invented by Japan, parts of Europe, Germany, and Korea, but where China's really excelled is driving down the cost of those industrial robots.
The use of robotics in advanced manufacturing in China is already widespread. But what's new and grabbing attention are humanoid robots powered by artificial intelligence. These are robots that look and move like humans and could eventually perform tasks just like us, or even better. Chinese humanoid robots can provide companionship.
它可以作为我们家里面的管家，为我们来进行服务。这不管是这个独居的老人也好，还是这个一些年轻人也好，还是孩子也好，其实都希望有这样的一个机器人来陪伴我们。
Remember the movie AI by Steven Spielberg? Here's the real-life version. Meet Yue Qian, who is based on a living boy.
我叫叶谦啊。
我的名字叫叶谦，但是这个问题我已经回答过了。我的名字源于一种物理学现象——量子跃迁，象征着突破与改变。你还有什么其他的问题吗？
以前我们的机器人的很多动作是根据场景的需要，然后让它去自动的做出反馈。今年用了大模型之后，我们这种反馈它就不是一个既定的一个程序，而是变成了一种可生成式的。不管是它的这个表达的这个内容，然后它看到的环境、感知到的环境，以及它的动作，其实都是生成出来的。所以这个呢，更适用于我们将来的一些这个复杂应用场景。比如说我们面向家庭服务的，那么它在家里面的这种服务场景会不断的变化。这可能是我们跟这个其他做工业应用的这个机器人不一样的。
And then there are the robots that can perform intricate tasks. According to Unitree Robotics, its G1 robot, which was launched in 2024, can move at 2 meters per second, has hands that can maneuver objects delicately, has knees that work better than humans, and has an AI system that allows it to learn and upgrade itself continuously. The Navigator 2, by the Zhexiang Humanoid Robot Innovation Center, launched in August 2024, can work in factories, play chess, and be a babysitter.
主持人，你知道外太空有多少个星球吗？
我们银河系大概有4000亿颗恒星，而宇宙中心系的数量呢，比银河系中的行星的数量还要多。
China tech giant Huawei also unveiled a humanoid robot in June 2024.
我的特殊技能是理解你的意图，解答你的问题，帮你取放物品。你看看需要我做什么呢？
我感觉有点口渴，你能不能给我点喝的？
我看到我面前的桌面上有一瓶瓶装水，中间有一个白色的盒子，一个苹果。瓶装水是桌面上可以解渴的东西，我可以把它拿给你。
那你把它拿给我吧。
让我试试吧。
The Chinese government has set a goal that China's humanoid robots should realize mass production by 2025. And by 2027, humanoid robots should become an important new engine of economic growth in China.
反人机器人它能够替代人在生产过程中未能够给或者高风险的部分的那些替代。反人机器人可以为人们在比如说一些这个火灾呀、森林抢险啊、地震灾害呀。
And that was a glimpse of the documentary When Titans Clash. This special episode, China's Plan to Conquer the Future, will air on Tuesday at 9 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. And you can also stream it on CNA Insider's YouTube and on CNA Video on Demand. And on that note, it is time to wrap up Friday's edition of East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube. We'll have a great Friday and an even better weekend. Thanks for watching.